Americans owe a total of $1.7 trillion in student loans. For many of them, their student loans represent their most significant debt. Paying that debt can be a significant burden that people are forced to carry for decades. Is it fair to require people who want a college degree to chain themselves to a massive financial obligation, especially in a world where higher education is increasingly necessary to get a decent paying job? I don't think so. I don't think it would be fair even if higher education wasn't necessary to get a good job, and I'm not alone. Student loan debt and what to do about it has become a major issue here in the United States. During the Trump administration, there was little hope of any meaningful solution, but now that Joe Biden is president and the Democrats control both houses of Congress, barely, the prospects for removing or at least greatly easing the burden of student loan debtors are a lot better. Or are they? A lot of folks, myself included, think the best way to deal with student loan debt is for the federal government to simply forgive it. The federal government is the largest creditor of student loans in the U.S. Of the $1.7 trillion of student loan debt owed by Americans, about $1 trillion of it is owned by the federal government. So, forgiving all federal student loans would be the single biggest action that could be taken to address the debt crisis. Unfortunately, forgiving all federal student loan debt isn't really on the table at the moment. However, as a presidential candidate, Joe Biden did pledge to forgive some student loan debt, which he might be able to do through an executive order without needing Congress to act. I say might because there is some disagreement on whether or not the President of the United States has the authority to cancel student loan debt all by himself. The Secretary of Education is currently conducting an investigation to determine if President Biden has that authority, but whether he has that authority or not, Biden's willingness to cancel student debt has been questionable since before the election. Senator Elizabeth Warren and other leading Democrats have been pushing the president to forgive $50,000 in debt for everyone who owes on a student loan. Biden has resisted those calls, proposing to cancel $10,000 per borrower instead, but he hasn't actually taken steps to do that yet. He's apparently still waiting to hear from the Education Department regarding presidential authority to cancel student debt via executive order, which is fair enough, but in May, he sent Congress a federal budget proposal for fiscal year 2022 that didn't include any student loan forgiveness either. The total omission of student loan forgiveness from the budget proposal compelled the Gravel Institute to tweet that the Biden administration had, quote, decided to cancel $0 in student debt. The thing is, that's not entirely true either. I get the impatience people feel toward Biden for taking so long to fulfill his campaign promise to at least cancel some student loan debt. I share it, and the fact that the budget proposal includes no new student loan debt forgiveness and that there is apparently not enough support in Congress for it to pass if it was included is deeply frustrating. But that doesn't mean the Biden administration has decided not to cancel any student debt. When Biden promised to forgive student loan debt during the presidential campaign, and when Democrats advocate forgiving student loan debt in Congress, what they're actually proposing is forgiving more student loan debt than the federal government currently does. There are already programs associated with many types of federally backed student loans that offer forgiveness or cancellation. But borrowers seeking relief have to apply for it, and only a tiny fraction of those applications are approved. It's not enough that you can't afford your loan payments. In most cases, you need to demonstrate that there are special circumstances surrounding your inability to pay back your loan, such as having a disability or being dead now. So, while it is possible to have your student loan debt forgiven right now, the odds that it will happen for you are extraordinarily slim. The Biden administration has canceled around $3 billion in student loan debt so far through these programs which are already in place. That is a hell of a lot better than nothing, but also less than a drop in the bucket when weighed against the $1.7 trillion of student loan debt in total. Existing forgiveness programs are just too narrowly targeted to have much of an impact on the overall crisis. According to the Institute for College Access and Success, the average amount of student debt carried by someone who earned their bachelor's degree is nearly $29,000. According to a study by NerdWallet, the average household with student loan debt has a total debt of over $57,000. That means that if Senator Warren's proposal to forgive up to $50,000 in student loan debt per borrower were to be enacted, it would not only completely wipe out the student loan debt of many people, it would also significantly reduce total household debt. Additionally, a study released earlier this year by the Roosevelt Institute found that even if no income eligibility requirements were imposed, large-scale student debt forgiveness would carry greater benefits for low-income borrowers than for high-income borrowers. And this is important because one of the arguments made against student loan forgiveness is that it would benefit the wealthy more than the poor. And why should someone from a wealthy family who took out student loans to pay for college get the same break on loan payments they can afford to make as lower-income borrowers who can't afford them? It's an argument worth considering in theory, but practically speaking, the numbers don't seem to support it. The Roosevelt Institute's research suggests that forgiving student loans would result in substantially larger wealth increases for those in the bottom 10% wealth bracket than for those in the top 10%. The main explanation for this seems to be the obvious one. Wealthier people borrow less money on average to pay for college because they can afford to. Forgiving a substantial amount of federal student loan debt would lift a burden from tens of millions of Americans. It would reduce wealth inequality, make it easier for people to save for retirement or purchase homes, stimulate the economy. Is there a reason not to do it? There's always a reason not to do something. Opponents of student loan forgiveness say that its economic impact is being overestimated by its advocates. And they say that simply forgiving the debts of so many people, the Department of Education estimates that forgiving up to $50,000 in student loans would eliminate the student loan debt of 36 million people, and forgiving only up to $10,000, as Biden has seemed more willing to do, would eliminate the student loan debt of 15 million people, represents a moral hazard. If we forgive the debts of so many people now, what's to stop future generations of students from accumulating even larger amounts of debt, which they assume will also eventually be canceled by the government? I'm not moved by this argument. For one thing, I'm more concerned about improving the lives of people struggling right now than I am about protecting hypothetical future people from moral hazard. For another, the argument is cynical and shows a lack of imagination and ambition on the part of those who make it. This particular moral hazard is only a concern if we assume things in the future will still be done the way they are now. But that doesn't have to be the case. I agree that forgiving student loans to address this debt crisis shouldn't lead to an even bigger debt crisis in the future, but the way to avert that future crisis isn't to leave the current generation of borrowers to drown. We can make higher education affordable to people by means other than lending them money, which they then have to pay back at interest. We can reimagine higher education in much the same way an earlier generation of Americans reimagined primary and secondary education in the 19th century. We can start to think of it not as a for-profit enterprise open to those who can afford it, but as a human right that can and should be available to everyone. That is, admittedly, a much more ambitious goal than student loan forgiveness. Education reform is a large-scale, long-term project, and it's going to need its own video. For now, there are some things you can do to help address the student debt crisis. First and foremost, contact your legislators. Write or call your senators and your member of Congress and tell them you support directly canceling federal student loan debt. Tell them to extend the hiatus on mandatory student loan payments that was established during the COVID-19 pandemic as well. That hiatus is set to expire at the end of September. Besides that, if you can, support organizations like Student Debt Crisis, a nonprofit that works with borrowers to help them manage their debt, and campaigns for student loan forgiveness and for reforming the student loan system. And finally, speak out. Make videos, write articles, post on social media. Tell people that you think the best way to solve the student loan debt crisis is to forgive student loan debt. Look, I hate having to view everything in economic terms. I think people should be able to pursue an education because they want to learn, acquire new skills, improve themselves, increase their understanding of the world around them, and pass that understanding on to others. But as long as the society in which we live forces us to regard it as an economic issue, higher education should be a path to advancement and liberation, not crushing financial obligation. We tie our survival to our ability to work, to earn money. We don't have to arrange our society that way, but it's what we've done. Then we tell people if they want to earn more money to have a better quality of life, they should get an education. An education they'll have to pay for. An education that can leave them wiser, more skilled, more attractive to employers, and standing at the bottom of a hole it will take some of them decades to climb out of. An education should leave people enlightened, not burdened. It should put people ahead, not behind. They should be freed by it, not shackled.